Now, Dr. Nitasha Kaul. Dr. Nitasha Kaul is a Kashmiri novelist, academic, poet, economic artist. Her novel Residue, shortlisted for the Man Asian Literary Prize, deals with the themes of Kashmiri identity, nation-state borders and absence. She is also the author of Imagining Economics Otherwise and several articles and chapters. Now may I request Dr. Nitasha to please present her work.
This on and send it.
Okay.
Those of you who are connected to me on Facebook will know that I've had a rough few days. So I apologize in advance for, no, I'll speak here because I'll need the mic for sure. So I apologize in advance if I...
If you cannot send me,
no, that's okay. The rest of me is fine. It's just my throat and this, I don't have fever anymore, so that's all. So I'll give you a few seconds while I settle and you can recover from the previous talk, which was really interesting. And you might have heard me speak about Kashmir, before, and I'm hoping that that is something that will come up in the. Oh, that switches it off. I'm hoping that will. Can you hear me? Hear me? Okay. If you can't hear me, just wave your hand or something, and I'll try to speak louder. Okay. So you would have heard me speak on Kashmir. If you haven't, then just to let you know, there are things that I have written which you can find online, which make my views on on Kashmir related topics and on specific things to do with Kashmiri identity, struggles, etc. Clear. So that's not what I will be focusing on in this talk, but that is out there, and in the question answer session I'm hoping that we can discuss some more of that because it also links up to some of the things that Divyesh has talked about. So the title of my talk today is Post-Colonial Neoliberal Nationalism in India, and I want to really just I will explain why I use these three terms: why post-colonial, why neoliberal, why nationalism. But just by way of preface, so this time when I arrived in Srinagar yesterday, it was after the space of a few years, and although you live here, and you would. I imagine that the transformation that I witnessed between the last time that I was here and this time, for me, was immensely drastic. So in the space of the last 5 years, just from the airport to coming to the city, it's striking that when I come to Delhi, now after the space of a few years, I can see how Hinduized India has become. In the same way, and it's quite tragic, when I came to Srinagar yesterday, it was striking how Indianized Srinagar is becoming. It was rather a very it was a shocking thing. It was like, what, in terms of the architecture, in terms of the changes to the environment, in terms of the commercialization, the languages used on the billboards, the lettering. So before I actually begin the talk, I just wanted to give you my personal reflection in that I think that it's not accidental that the symbolic landscape around us, to somebody who comes and who did take pictures on the last visit and this time, it's strikingly different. I want to go back and look at the pictures and actually confirm what I feel that is strikingly the case, from lots of things, but Kashmiri dahi in Srinagar, like Kashmiri dahi, what does that even mean? Sounds good. And why would you have that in Kashmir? It's also all the letterings, the kinds of things that are being sold. It's very, very, the kinds of changes that are happening are striking anyway. So I just wanted to say that. And the reason I think is, to begin with that, is because I think that what is happening to democracy and globally, and what is happening to democracy insofar as we can call it that in what is happening in India, is significant, and the transformation will have very significant long-term consequences. And although here there is a distance between the imagination of what you experience here and what people in the rest of the world, their concerns, because your concerns are more immediate for you. But in spite of that distance, I think that it is important to understand the mechanics and the dynamics of these changes because those changes, the changes to what is happening in India, will have an impact here, are having an impact. And understanding that, I think, is important, because it's not right to say that what we don't know won't hurt us. What we don't know might hurt us even more severely if we are not aware of those changes that are happening. So this talk really is about those changes that are happening in this realm of, in this, specifically since 2014 in the Modi-led BJP government. So I won't mince words. I'll start by saying that, that at this moment in India, with the entire range of changes that one witnesses, the Hinduization, we have a government that is populist, of course, claims to be populist. It's authoritarian. It's crony capitalist. It's, of course, right-wing. It's revanchist in that it claims to recover some lost glory. Imagine lost glory. It's conservative. And it's led by a nativist narcissist. These are my views. As a scholar, I'm entitled to my views. Your presence here does not indicate, I'm saying this for for you as well, does not indicate your agreement with these views, but these are my views. So it is, if you look at what happened this summer, well, even before that, what has been happening the last few years, but specifically what happened around Rohit Vermila case, then at the JNU, then the entire case around JNU, and a professor friend of mine posted yesterday that, that Professor Menon in JNU has again been sent threatening notices because she held a talk, a gathering with students. So these changes are not insignificant, the changing of textbooks, the entire range, it's like a rewriting of history, it's like an attempt to legislate that memory. It is significant, and then the summer that you witnessed here in Kashmir, and right at the point at which the world finally was beginning to receive was beginning to care about the fact that human beings were being shot with, with something that anywhere in the world people use for animals, if that. So that when that issue finally started, when there was so much, more of a hue and cry about it, what happens? The issue becomes about India and Pakistan. It becomes about the border strikes. It becomes about the surgical strikes. And then, when that surgical strike gambit doesn't work as it's supposed to, because there's an entire thing about, did they even happen? Then what happens from that is the surgical strike on the what is called the black economy here, but elsewhere you would call it the shadow economy. So the surgical strike on the economy. And two things I want to say there. Firstly, the way in which the nation and the economy are being, the language of nation and the language of economy are being used together to benefit specific interests in the interests while claiming to be about public interest, means that neoliberalism and nationalism are not opposed to each other. So it's not state versus the market. The interests, it's actually, and that's what I hope to be arguing in the talk, is that neoliberalism and nationalism are not working oppositionally or against each other, but happening and working together in a specific post-colonial context. So it's not, therefore the economy and the nation as these concepts are sought to be refashioned in terms that are similar. So there's a surgical strike on black economy, and you have demonetization, which is a weird kind of public policy where there's very little accountability for it. And then secondly, there's this whole thing about how is power exercised in a democracy? Leaders are accountable, they have to explain their rationale, not when they choose. Ministers, leaders, people in the public eye, they are not supposed to explain when they choose. They're supposed to explain and address people's grievances when they arise. So it's not, I find it very strange, striking, and quite arbitrary, this real sort of deep arbitrariness about the functioning that, maybe it's like that bureaucrat sitting at some counter saying, well, maybe I'll give you your form, maybe I won't give you your form. It depends on how good you are or what mood I am in. It's that kind of a rationale with which public policy is functioning. Maybe I'll give you something, or if you're good, like Santa, I'll announce something interesting for you. It may be a tax cut or something. But on the other hand, if I don't, then you just have to bear with it. It's this very personalized use of an exercise, a personalized and rather arbitrary sense of use of political power, which is not what one expects in a democracy. Now, so why do I talk of post-colonial first of all? Post-colonial, not in the sense of post-of colonial. So, and it's not that when we use the term post-colonial without a hyphen, certainly it doesn't mean colonialism is ended. Post-colonial in the sense that something that is marked by the colonial experience. And the marking of by that colonial experience means that it gives a certain, it gives us a certain status and role to the idea of the West. So in a post-colonial sense, in this way, in the post-colonial sense, the West becomes a very weird entity, you know, it's something that is simultaneously attractive and yet repulsive. So you will find contexts in which it's worth emulating the Western economic model, you know, because the malls are good, having that kind of hyper-commercial setup is good. But then you would also simultaneously find the entire thing about Paschatya Sabhyata, you know, Western degradation and Western immorality and all of that. And these two things, which are held at the same time. So the West is good, but the West is also bad, and it's good when it serves the economic model that we want, and it's bad when it comes to challenging certain social mores and norms. So that is not something, of course, that is unique to India. Numerous societies that have been marked by the classical imperial colonial experience are post-colonial in this sense, in that the West has a resonance for them, which works in certain ways. Neoliberal and nationalism. Now, neoliberalism and nationalism are typically seen as opposite things. So the idea is that you either rely on the state or you go for a free market, and the forces of the state and the forces of the market act against each other. That's the standard idea, right? Now, this is, of course, the fact that these ideologies are opposed is increasingly challenged, because it's not that the state exists in opposition to the market, but in fact the state is what is enabling the expansion of the market. So the state is actually working in the interests of the market, unlike the classical idea that it's either the state or the market. But having this opposition, the fact that it's the state versus market, also allows us to maintain an opposition of material versus symbolic. So then, the state doesn't have to take responsibility for certain things, and the market doesn't have to take responsibility for other things. You can say that there is a disaggregation of the material and the symbolic realms. Now, the way in which this has been happening in India, in this present, the present undoing of democracy in India, is through a mechanism where there is a disconnect between what is said and what is done. Now, how is this disconnect maintained? It's maintained by speaking with what one might call a forked tongue. That means you say different things to different people. When you are in India, you say that you want a pure country, and you want these Nehruvian secularism is bad, etc. When you are outside India, you say India is a secular country, India is this. When you are in India, you say that you are really concerned about the plight of people. When you are outside India, you say that you make fun of people's difficulties. Likewise, when you are speaking to your corporate constituency, you can say that you are going to create this, this wonderful free market paradise. When you speak to the grassroots, then you say, we are interested in developing your villages and in caring for your infrastructure, etc. Likewise, when you speak to the people who are in the cities, then you talk about, emphasize on women's safety, women's empowerment, jobs, etc. But when you speak to your Sangh, your Sangh support base, then you talk about purity of the nation and continuation of that. So this is not accidental. What I'm arguing is that this idea, my point is that this is not incidental. It doesn't mean that they don't know what they're doing, and the changes. So when you are in Kashmir, you'll say one thing. When you are in India, you'll say another thing. For those people, when they come to Kashmir, they'll say, okay, we are interested in dialogue, etc. When they are outside, they'll say we are interested in security. It's not accidental. This maintenance of this ambiguity is very central to the project of power of the present government and of the undoing of democracy. Because if you say different things at different times, you cannot be held accountable for the consequences of things that result from what you have said. Because at one time you may say, we are interested in human rights, at another time you may act as if you don't care about human rights. There is not only no accountability, on top of that, if you stay silent, nobody knows whether that silence is actually agreement with one thing or the other. So that, for want of a better word, I'd say strategic use of ambiguity is very central, because you don't actually know what the project here is. And this, I think, is certainly happening in this current context. So what it does is it erodes trust. It erodes any basis for any kind of actual understanding of policy in order for the opposition or any kind of resistance to it to be organized. Because you could be opposing something which may not be something that is deeply held by the people in power. It is also, of course, about the politics of the spectacle, that, to create going way back to the late 80s, early 90s, which is, of course, a time of great trauma for Kashmir, but it is also the end of the Cold War when, notice, free markets and democracy both win. It is not again accidental that free markets and democracy is this specific good combination that is sought to be applied everywhere. It's not just one or just the other. These two things have a long history going back. It is also the time of the Rath Yatras and the Babri Masjid demolition, etc. But also, again, the time at which BJP and the Hindutva Brigade drops its support for Swadeshi. They go all out for markets and business and all of that, which is in opposition to whatever policies on economic nationalism that they had for decades before. So these two things, I'm saying, are happening and have been happening for a long time together in tandem with each other. And although this is global, in India, the impact of this is quite accelerated in the last now 2+ years. The casualties of this, of course, are the minorities, the people who are seen as not human enough, the Kashmiris, the people in the northeast, the Dalits, other religious minorities. These people are going to be even more the casualties of this neoliberal nationalist project in post-colonial India. These people are going to be, in ever greater numbers. They are not, because the dehumanization means they are not seen as being human in the same sense. As this government, which has a 31% share of the electorate, so it's not, wasn't hugely backed, but which has the backing of the corporate sector and of the RSS, are fashioning both the nation, concept of the Indian nation, and the concept of the economy for their own interests, while claiming that this all is happening in the interests of the public. Now, this is also colonial in the sense that it's colonial about divide and rule. It is also, as the scholar Mamdani said, about define and rule. The power of defining things also gives you when you define things a certain way, you are exercising a power of that definition and of what will then result from that definition. So it's not just divide and rule, but also define and rule. Now, why does it succeed? Well, it succeeds because I think as worldwide we live in a context of since 9/11 especially, of Islamophobia, which has been on the rise, of neoliberal capitalism, which has been the excesses of which have gone even more unchallenged since the recession in the West. The rising powers discourse, which is used to its utmost by countries, specifically India, but all the rising powers, but India is prominent there. And also because of the racism versus multiculturalism debates and prejudices that exist in the West. So there's this idea that people from these post-colonial contexts feel this sense of validation that they have now arrived on the world scene because they can consume a certain way, and they say, well, so what if we exercise violence in Kashmir in this way? The West did that elsewhere. That's the idea of power. That's what it means to be powerful. That's what it means to be a citizen of a rising power country. Now, two other things I would like to say, I guess, is that all of this entire neoliberal nationalist project in post-colonial India has its casualties, and it is creating a larger pool of what can be called disposable populations. People whose interests are not seen as being important. People whose bodies, whose lives, whose livelihoods are disposable. Whose suffering can just happen in the larger national interest. Because, that's just the cost that you have to pay for the idea of the nation that they want. Now, this maintaining and managing this political identity requires, a lot of specific kinds of reactions, and I will list some of them. So firstly, any criticism of the government, its leaders, specifically of the Prime Minister, even in a democracy, is not seen as just that criticism. It's seen as a criticism of India. As if all of India is one party, one government, one leader, or one cabinet. So firstly, criticism is seen as criticism of India. Secondly, coded communication in political speech especially, the use of humor and satire, talking down to the people and making fun, use of ridiculing the opponents, ridiculing other people, making fun of people. And that coded communication as psychologists, political psychologists will tell you, is a way of appealing to your in-group. Because when you say that, you know who will laugh, and you know why they will laugh, and you know what effect that laughter will have upon the other people. So coded communication. Mixed or delayed messages. So, the idea of when something is happening, you don't respond to it immediately. Or you give ambiguous responses. Or you respond to it after, as in the case of, for example, the Kashmir over the summer. You don't respond to it. You talk about everything else under the sun, but you don't talk about what is happening in your so-called integral part, where children are being blinded. So you just kind of delay the response. Because if you are delaying it, nobody can accuse you of having this view or having that view. You will simply delay it. Silence, as I said. The labeling of people as anti-national. So whether you are an environmentalist, or you are somebody who works for human rights, or you are somebody who is opposing a certain privatization or mining project or any of that, you are anti-national. Which is a striking term to use in a democracy, in any democracy that actually claims to be or wants to be a substantive democracy. Use of derogatory language linked to the humor, insult, and satire. Avoidance of minority symbols. You will know that this has a long history, including in the electoral campaigning, when specific clothes were not, the skull cap, for example, was not something that was part of the campaign. Benefit from divide and rule, and then later act as savior. So first create a chaos, because of course if the nation is in a chaos, the economy is in chaos, then you can be the savior. If things aren't first projected as being destroyed, then you can't save them. Refusing to take responsibility for outcomes. The entire thing that this goes back to the revanchism idea, that this is somehow about the resurgence of the humblest, the poorest people. It's like Trump saying, I am the person who's going to save the poor, white, working class people, when I happen to be a billionaire who doesn't even pay his taxes. So it's that kind of a thing. So it's like, I who am friends with all these big multinationals, and I work in their, my policies end up supporting their interests, and yet somehow I am the person who's going to stand up for the humble, ordinary, everyday person on the, in the village. Punishing the opponents plus censorship. So the punishing of opponents, overt or covert, plus censorship and self-censorship. We have seen the chilling effect of this in the university spheres, but also here, the banning of newspapers, the banning of Kashmiri reader. What could be more striking than the fact that that Khurram Parvez was in prison, and that all those sorts of things, in spite of the court saying something, and all those things about what clothes he wears, that entire, it's just, I mean, it's absurd. It makes a complete mockery of anything that you would expect in a system that works. A weakening of legislation, specifically environmental legislation, human rights legislation, any legislation that gives you the right to dissent without fear. If you know that you can be imprisoned for a Facebook post, or that somebody can knock on your door and trouble you because you said something that was anti-national, then obviously that will have also that entire effect of self-censorship on people. Changing of, as I said, textbooks and institutional heads, using high-tech solutions to problems which are then presented as win-win solutions. I think this is striking. So there's a saying in Hindi, "Jahan kaam kare sui kaha kari talwari," that if you can do with a needle, why would you need a sword? But the idea is, no, instead of taking care of crops through a regular way, you want to have drones to take care of the crops. Or instead of having people pay a certain way, you want them to have this entire new technology, because that's apart from serving the interests of specific entrepreneurs, it also serves the interests of surveillance. And I think that is another thing that we may be missing now, but in a few years we will realize that it's one thing to say, yes, your thumb will do everything and your phone will do everything, but we have seen that around the world, especially in more technologically advanced societies, the issues of surveillance have a huge impact on people's ability to dissent in political terms, and that is important. Not losing that or struggling against not losing that is important. Or when things go wrong, blame the opposition or foreign conspiracy. So if you're talking about this, it's the Western media, never mind what's actually happening on the ground. And this whole thing is part of what forms the political myths that we have seen in many other contexts as of the great leader. So I will lastly say that while we are, which on their terms will happen through suffering, which must be accepted, and that suffering is imposed on the most vulnerable people, the minorities, the poor, the people in Kashmir, people who are Dalits, an entire range of people who are already marginalized, disadvantaged, or resisting. Those are the people who are supposed to take the additional suffering for a pure nation. If you don't agree to that suffering, then you are not proving your patriotism, then you are an anti-national, you are somebody who is unpatriotic. So it's this weddedness to a very specific idea of the nation as a corporation and as a diseased body. This is not unusual, it's not only happening in India. I think globally we are seeing an electorally legitimated rise of misogynist authoritarianism, which, whether you look at Erdogan, you look at Putin, you look at Trump, you look at, Modi here, you look at an entire range of leaders around the world, that what is happening is this electorally legitimated. And this is not again surprising. Hitler came to power on a ballot. Hitler was elected. So an electorally legitimated rise of misogynists, because these people typically also see themselves as very hyper-masculine men who are there to be the saviors. This misogynist authoritarianism, which is facilitating fascism and claiming to challenge, yet at the same time profiting from neoliberal capitalism. So if I had to sort of summarize my thesis in one sentence, I'd say that was it. It's the electorally legitimated rise of misogynist authoritarianism, which is facilitating fascism, paving the ground for a fascist society, and it claims to challenge while at the same time profits from neoliberal capitalism. Because none of these people will say, we love capitalists. Not even Trump will say that. They all claim to be challenging the power interests, etc. They'll use the progressive language or the progressive concerns of the erstwhile left, while actually hurting the very people they are supposed to be helping. Now this has happened before, as we know globally, and I will end with with some of the things that the Norwegian, a Norwegian theorist, Indianised, from 1945, did an analysis of, looking back at fascist society, and said, okay, how do groups maintain their domination? So, put forward this theory which is called a domination framework. And the idea is how, what are the strategies of social manipulation that are used to suppress and humiliate opposition and opponents in order for a dominant group to maintain its position, either established or unexposed, in a hierarchy. So how does a dominant group maintain its position? And the strategies of social manipulation that it uses are, and if I read these out to you, you will see the parallels in the context of, what's happening. You make the opposition invisible, opponents invisible. You ridicule them. You withhold information. Again, quite important. You withhold information. You use double bind strategies. You heap blame upon the opponents. You put people to shame. You objectify them, and you either use force or use threats of force. This is, looking at the way in which, a study of how domination in the context of fascism came about, the classical example, Hitler's example of fascism. This has also subsequently then been used by other, other scholars to say that these are the similar kinds of strategies of social manipulation that are used for the interests of patriarchy. These are also the kinds of social strategies which would lead to, some of the things that I elaborated for you, the little X-ray that I said when I said these kinds of strategies. These are at work, and if we can only at our peril not understand them, because while our immediate concerns in a dominated, colonized context are these concerns, but how that larger landscape of colonialism is changing should also be of interest to us in order to be able to sort of stay one step ahead of what is to come, which